Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The 30th United Nations Climate Change Conference, commonly known as COP30, has kicked off in Brazil's Amazon city of Belém. The UN has warned that the world has failed to meet the goal set in the 2015 Paris Agreement, limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and is now calling for immediate action. In September, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced China's 2035 climate pledges to further strengthen the country's climate response. So will COP30 achieve substantial results? Is it still possible to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century? And what does China's commitment to a green transition mean for the world? And can the Paris Agreement remain strong despite U.S. withdrawal? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Dimitri the Boer, Director for China of ClientEarth, Wu Changhua, President of the Global Climate Academy. Well, welcome to Dialogue. So, Changhua, I will start with you. Recently, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated that the COP30 must be the turning point where the world delivers a bold and credible response plan. From his tone, we can sense this strong sense of urgency. And tell us why there's such a strong feel of urgency in fighting climate change.
Thank you, Qinduo. Nice to join your program again, together with Dimitri. We've all been watching very, very closely what's happening in Belém at the COP30. And if you look at the leadership summit last week, there were lots of messages actually sent out. You just mentioned the Secretary General of UN, Mr. Guterres. The way he said, this must be the beginning of a new decade, a decade of acceleration. There are a few things actually reflected in that. On one side, there is a tremendous sense of urgency because climate change is intensifying. We've already been living in this 1.5 degrees Celsius warming world already in the last year or two. And so if you look at extreme weather events, floods, droughts, storms, extreme heats, you name it, and the suffering, the damage, the costs are tremendous. We set targets, and we said actually, we should manage to drop the emissions, and leading up to 2030, we need to decrease our emissions by at least actually 45% over 2019 level. We are not doing that at all. Rather, actually, the emissions have been rising. So that has definitely the sense of urgency. But in the meantime, I think there were lots of expectations about what could potentially be achieved in Belém at the COP30, and hopefully somehow global leaders will be able to come together to overcome all the hurdles, the barriers, reach really consensus, very importantly, put the acts together, particularly using the vehicle of the 2035 NDCs. So that will be really, start to kick off this sort of new era of acceleration of solutions, actions, partnerships, and innovation. At the end of the day, hopefully we'll be able still to deliver the set of targets, and by 2030, manage to somehow decrease our emissions by about 45%, and ideally by 2035, and reducing emissions by 55% at least over 2019 level.
Dimitri, you were in Brazil not long ago, and in your understanding and in your observation, what would actually make this conference, COP30, a turning point and not just another declaration?
Well, I think it starts with also recognizing that global climate governance really does work. Some people are expressing doubts about that these days. But, the process that we started in 1992 has actually helped the world to agree to lower emissions. And also that means that the heating today, but also the heating that is expected by the end of the century, is already much lower than it otherwise would be. So first of all, focusing on this is important, and then sharing that more positive message also about the economic opportunities of the climate transition. So right now, because there's also political pushback in many countries against climate action, it's very important to show what are all the benefits here. I think that's something that the Brazil COP is actually doing quite a good job at conveying. The focus on implementation is also very important. So any actions coming out of this that reaffirm implementation all around the world. And I would say China, more than any other country, is demonstrating its commitment to real implementation, seeing all of the wonderful green technologies that are coming out of China, seeing all of the economic growth that is happening in China now as a result of climate action. That really gives confidence to other countries that this is a journey that is going to benefit people and livelihoods and the economies, and at the same time secure a low carbon future for us.
Well, Changhua, I want to draw your attention to this report. According to this emissions gap report 2025, the planet is still on course for up to 2.8 degrees Celsius of warming this century, despite a decade of commitments since the Paris Agreement. What has caused this widening gap between pledges and action here?
The reasons are diverse, multiple. And if you look at the policy implementations, it's very uneven. Different countries definitely been challenged by different level of capabilities to deliver what's set on the table already. Secondly, some major reversal of policies we've witnessed already in some major economies, and that's really damaging at this moment. Then if you look at actually the transfer of technologies and financial support, financing support, climate finance from developed countries to developing countries, we're really lagging behind, far behind there. So in a nutshell, I think, yes, we set targets, and we definitely, as Dimitri said, we are on a better trajectory compared to a few decades ago. And literally, if you look at it back in the 2010, 2000s, that we were literally on the track towards the 4 to 6 degrees Celsius warming. And today, as the UNEP report said, now we are on this 2.8 degrees sort of warming trajectory. But don't forget the commitment, and we said already, hopefully by the end of the century, we'll be somehow managed to control the warming below 2 degrees, ideally below 1.5 degrees Celsius there. So we're not there yet. But in the meantime, I think particularly reflected in Belém in Brazil, and countries like China and many European countries have continued their endeavors actually to deliver clean energy transition, to invest in clean energy, clean infrastructure. Of course, there's still lots of financial capital flowing to poor countries, including EU, like China. China has been advancing the South-South climate collaboration with the many poor developing countries there. So there are many signs of hope. So on one side, yes, the gap remains large, and we started to recognize why, the root causes there. But in the meantime, we do need to figure out what works. Hopefully somehow we'll be able to keep the momentum of political will on the table, on the track, so that no matter how challenging it is, the political contest there, the global community will continue to advance the clean energy transition, fighting climate change, and driving just transition.
Well, Dimitri, as Changhua mentioned, probably there are different factors, political, financial, technology transfer. Last year, the COP29 ended unhappily with the developed nations agreeing to provide $300 billion a year in climate financing to developing countries by 2035. And then, in your opinion, exactly how much is needed, and are developed countries ready to do that?
Well, I'm not sure what exactly the number is that is needed, but it has been recognized that it's definitely more than the 300 billion. I think what's important to focus on when you're talking about these numbers is also what it actually costs if we don't act on climate change. And once you do that, it becomes really obvious that all of these numbers, as large as they may seem, are actually a real bargain in terms of avoiding the damages that would occur to all of our future generations and economies if we don't. And even ourselves, I'm about 50 years old. in another 25 years from now, I'll be 75, but we will all be living in a world which is several degrees potentially warmer, and that is going to cause all sorts of problems for our societies. So acting on this might sound expensive, but it's not. It's very, very affordable, and also it brings economic benefits when we do. I'd like to highlight one thing about climate finance that is really a major initiative from Brazil right now. It's called the Tropical Forest Forever Facility. Brazil is perhaps one of the flagship outcomes of this COP will be the establishment of a new fund to protect the existing forests of the world, tropical forests. And tropical forests do so much for our societies beyond storing carbon. They also host biodiversity, and they provide climate benefits for agriculture. So they're incredibly important. And somehow, up to now, the world has still been deforesting a lot of the tropical forests. So somehow paying for that and making that economically attractive for everybody is a very good idea, in my view.
With Dimitri, the good point there, at least we are trying to keep the status quo, if not improving the situation. Earlier you mentioned about the disinformation. Tell us more on that. We know that, of course, we all know President Trump, speaking at the UN conference, a General Assembly there, talked about, climate change is a hoax, and renewable energy is a scam, things like that. Is that message really being somehow spread to other parts of the world?
Well, I'm worried that there are actually people who are buying into those narratives. And, to us, it might seem obvious, that choosing green technologies gives you, a number of economic benefits, give you more energy security, and, give you a low carbon future that is much more attractive. But the US perhaps has, a lot of vested interests in the fossil fuel sector. So to some people there, it might seem more strategic to be doubling down on that. And I think there are a lot of people who are used to what's normal to them, which is burning fossil fuels, and letting go and trying a new model is difficult, and it inevitably really does require changes in economies and sometimes in people's lifestyles.
Well, Changhua, under the Paris Agreement, every country is expected to update its climate pledges, known as Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. In his address to the UN Climate Summit in September, Chinese President Xi Jinping unveiled China's new NDCs. To cut total greenhouse gas emission by around 7 to 10% from their peak, raise non-fossil energy consumption to over 30%, expand wind and solar power to over 6 times the 2020 levels, and greatly increase forest coverage, among other aims. How do you assess the ambition and the feasibility of these new targets?
Well, China is one of the 64 countries that submitted before COP30, their NDCs there. And China's NDC definitely has unfolded some clarity and also certainty in terms of what China plans to do. So as you mentioned, the few numbers there, so that's the quantitative targets Chinese government has made to the 2035 sort of timeline there. As this commitment into the Paris Agreement there. I think, if you look at the details there, it's not just a few numbers out there, but rather it is a fully well thought through implementation plan, and it's structured in a way that it's about system change, it's about energy transformation. So yes, we do need to mitigate climate, emissions as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So I think a lot of people have been guessing like where China will peak its emissions, because we said we're going to peak our emissions before 2030. So still today we do not have that clarity, but somehow if we're not there yet, we're definitely getting very, very closer to that. And then of course we need to burn down the emission curves as much as possible. In order to do so, we do need to, on one side, emphasizing really capturing the benefit of energy efficiency, investing energy efficiency as much as possible. We need to somehow shift away from coal towards non-fossil fuels, and we've been already leading the global investment in renewable energies, solar, PV, you name it, as well as EV battery technologies there. But in the meantime, we do need to specifically address coal issues there, right? And so we're still not yet. I still call that as a curse, somehow fossil fuel curse. We need to decode as much as possible. But somehow through the 2035 NDCs, now we have more clarity and we have the pathway. And so we know China will definitely continue its endeavor to deliver that. But as I said, also, besides the mitigation, because we are living in a world of climate change already, and so we need to somehow to act also invest in adaptation. So that's a major step forward. And for the first time, Chinese government put really the adaptation actions to the high up the agenda of the NDC. So that would invest heavily actually in early warning, resilience, cities, rural areas, ecosystem, economic sectors, you name it. So it's really complete a whole, NDCs that not only address mitigation but also adaptation, and very importantly, it set very clarity on means of implementation, and so that is a wholly integrated sort of NDC that's convincing, that's clear, and that says also the clarity for not only domestically but also for international community that China continues to be determined to bend down the emission curves and to continue to fight climate change and demonstrating its leadership and supporting for other developing countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dimitri, by the end of September, only about 60 countries had submitted or announced their new NDCs for 2035, far fewer than expected. Does this slow pace reflect negotiation fatigue, or does it suggest a deeper problem in global climate governance?
Well, I think the US pulling out earlier this year probably did affect the timeline for some countries to develop their NDCs. So the fact that China and the UN Secretary General Guterres and also President Lula and Ursula von der Leyen of the EU earlier this year came together in April in a virtual summit and made a very clear commitment to continue the climate transition. I think that was a very important moment in my view, where the rest of the world basically said, no, we're going to continue with climate action no matter what the US does. But that did cause some delays. So, I think looking at the other countries and their NDCs, progress is being made, and it's always better late than never. Let's be clear. Every, let's say, 0.1 degree of warming that we can avoid is going to make a tremendous difference economically. And we're talking trillions of dollars for future generations. So it really matters. So assessing all countries' national determined contributions and focusing on the actual implementation of those commitments is really important. I would say the key now, China clearly is always the biggest factor here. And so China's commitment and leadership matters extremely much for the whole world. And I think many other countries and business leaders, will be looking at that and based on that, we'll be assessing their choices today. Are they going to invest in the low carbon future now? And the answer should be yes.
Mm-hmm. Wu Changhua, if you take a closer look at the U.S. Withdrawal and its impact from the Paris Agreement, according to this emissions gap report 2025, it warned that the U.S. planned withdrawal from Paris Agreement will erase roughly 0.1 degree Celsius of progress. What does it mean? Of course, the U.S. is one of the biggest emitters. In what way that may affect this moral and political legitimacy of the entire framework, not only in the U.S., as Dimitri mentioned, probably, other parts of the world?
Well, 0.1 degrees sounds a little small, but in reality, when you put in the backdrop of intensifying climate crisis, every fraction of a degree of temperature rise actually is very significant. So let me just translate a little bit actually about this impact of 0.1 degrees Celsius there. So globally, through all the scientific assessment, basically saying we probably have to rely on not only mitigation adaptation measures, but also we have to rely on carbon removal from the atmosphere in order to really getting back to to the trajectory of the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target there. And in order actually to somehow to achieve this 0.1 degrees, we need to remove about 220 gigatons of emissions, carbon emissions actually in the atmosphere. That costs tremendous amount of money. So yes, the U.S. withdrawal, sounds like it had this 0.1 degrees Celsius sort of impact there, but in reality, that's very, very significant. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point, I echo very strongly what Dimitri has said. Luckily, the global climate, system remains resilient, with or without the U.S. at this moment. So that's a really good thing, positive thing, that particular China, EU, some major countries still decided actually to stay together, continue to lead, to drive this transformation, fighting climate change. But in the meantime, there are definitely negative impacts there. I think, after Trump with second time withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, there are some countries immediately echoing that. Basically started to say, yes, climate change is, con job, it's a hoax, all the sort of, messages being sent out there already. Of course, we know at the fundamental part is really because the interest of fossil fuels. So that's very, very clear. Now, back to the NDC part, and basically saying why so many, but 2/3 of countries still have not submitted NDCs there. Beside the reasons of this sort of geopolitical, situation there, I think in reality, for most developing, small developing countries, it's even technically, financially challenging for them to put together a really sort of implementable, even bankable, NDCs, because we all know in order to mobilize global financial resources to support other developing countries there, somehow you need to put together a convincing sort of business plan. NDCs are more like a business plan you put on the table with say, what do you want to do, how you're going to do it, how much it's going to cost, and what would be the returns, or whatever you name it. Somehow, for many poor developing countries, they do not have that time, resources, even financial resources and energy to do so. So from that perspective, I think rather than just say, hey, all the other countries, if you haven't submitted NDC, just do it. But rather, I think global community needs to put together some expertise resources to support many developing countries that cannot really do so or do a good job at this moment to deliver that. In that context, I do think China, EU, and some other capable countries actually should offer their hands in order to really meaningfully support those countries to get their acts together so that will be able to act in sync with each other and really make sure not only the system is not collapsing, but also we can act together to deliver the results.
Mm-hmm. Well, speak of that, Changhua, let's sort of like in sticking on the impact of the Washington's action. There's a report by Financial Times that Washington has even threatened to impose punitive action on countries that support climate measures considered by the U.S. as, to be obstructing its trade. How do you look at this action? Some of the vulnerable countries, they would say probably, in order to avoid punitive action from the U.S., they might choose to stay away, let's say, or stay neutral instead of expressing their enthusiasm to join I would say, righteous action to fight climate change here.
I think the message, the investigative reporting said it really well, clearly, actually. The U.S., the current U.S. administration is behaving like a bully to other countries in terms of fighting climate change. I think the typical example is about this International Maritime Organization's agenda to, to manage to prevent and shipping pollutions there, or put a tax, carbon tax, emission tax on shipping. And so literally the current U.S. administration high-level officials have been calling different countries, threatening different countries with the sanctions, visa sanctions, or economic sanctions, you name it, and even personal, official personal sort of threats. Really unfortunate. It's illegal, it's against the law, it's against the international law. Somehow we do have responses. I think on one side, you definitely started to see more litigation. So we have the International Court of Justice, international judiciary system, some vehicles actually for countries to resort to in order somehow to protect themselves and somehow to fight back. But in the meantime, actually, when countries are getting to know more, understand more how China has been delivering this energy, clean energy transition, not only domestically, but really providing this capability, product, services at affordable level, accessible level for many other developing countries there. So somehow people got a sense of what lies ahead, what is possible, what is the right thing to do. So rather than being influenced by the U.S. bullying behavior, somehow the others should stick together more urgently than ever, more importantly together to carry on the baton and really deliver the sustainability agenda.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dimitri, recently there's an article carried by The Economist magazine. It cites China's massive growth in green energies. Then it pointed to the effect, I guess, quote, the main reason countries have yet to decarbonize their economies is because they lack the means to do so. And that is what China is fixing. It is providing ever greater amounts of clean energy capacity to the world at the prices which are cheaper than any alternative, including coal and natural gas. So, we can say China is playing a major role in providing countries with accessible means to reduce emission here?
Yes, exactly. And I would say that is the best news that we've had since the Paris Agreement. Finally, we're having now a situation where the low carbon technologies are more affordable and more attractive and are sufficiently high quality to provide us with, a real low carbon future. And that means a lot. There's a lot of benefits here. Many regions in the world that have yet to electrify can go straight to renewable energy. It's not the more expensive option. It's now the cheaper and more attractive option. It means you're not reliant on any other country or company to supply you with fossil fuel energy, which are going to cost you every year. And if they don't supply it, the lights go out. Europe is finding out that the hard way right now. So being able to have access to low carbon technologies that are affordable is really going to make all the difference for the climate transition. Now, I would say there's currently a situation where China is so dominant in all of these sectors that that can create some discomfort in other countries around the world. And so the best strategy, I would say, would be for emerging countries to quickly start partnering with Chinese companies and to produce all of these green technologies in places like Turkey, Mexico, Indonesia, et cetera, because then we're seeing that these green technologies will really diffuse all around the world, and many countries, many people will see the economic benefits to them, and there will be less concern around somehow, China being the only country that seems to be able to benefit from the climate transition.
Well, that's in the interest of everyone, I guess. With that, we're coming to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Wu Changhua. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.